There is a small gesture I make 100 times a year without thinking. Someone reaches toward me with something small. A coffee. A pen. A piece of bread off their own plate. A coat held open in the cold. A seat on a crowded train. A favor I had not asked for but quietly needed. Their hand comes halfway out. And mine, almost before I notice, is already moving in the opposite direction. Oh, I'm okay. No, please. Really, thank you, but I'm fine. I can manage. Don't worry about me. The words leave my mouth before I have decided anything. They are reflex. They are habit. They are something my body learned to say long before I knew what I was saying it for. And the other person's hand pauses for a moment, and then returns to them. Empty. Nothing dramatic happens. The morning continues. The train arrives. The coffee is finished. The coat is put back on. The piece of bread is eaten by the person who offered it. But sometimes, in the quiet that follows, something small inside me feels heavier than the favor would have been. Their hand was halfway out. Mine was already saying no. And I am beginning to wonder what, exactly, my hand was protecting. I can give without effort. I make the second cup of tea for the friend who came over. I leave the bigger half of the bread. I offer the seat on the bus. I listen until the other person has said the thing they came to say. I carry the heavier bag. I send the message that says I am here. These things flow out of me almost without permission. But the same gestures, turned the other direction, lock somewhere in my chest. Someone makes me the second cup of tea. I sit there holding it as if I am borrowing something I might be asked to return. Someone leaves me the bigger half. I notice it and feel an obscure debt opening inside me. Someone offers me their seat. I almost stand back up. Someone listens to me longer than usual. I cut myself off, apologize, ask how their day was. The same act, the same kindness, the same warmth, but the direction makes it heavy. I can pour the cup. I cannot hold it out. Why is it harder to receive than to give? It is not that I do not want the kindness. It is that something in me does not yet know how to be the person on the other side of it. Some gestures are not refused because they are too much. Some gestures are refused because they ask us to be too soft for a moment. I once heard a small story about an old man in a small village. He was known across the valley for never accepting anything. At weddings he would smile and place the offered envelope gently back into the hand of the giver. At funerals he would bow and say, kindly, that the family kept what little had been brought. At birthdays and harvest feasts and the small ordinary gifts that pass between neighbors, he had one quiet phrase he used. Thank you. I will accept the heart only. Please keep the rest. At first the village thought him modest. Then they thought him noble. Then, slowly, they came to think of him as difficult, the way one comes to think of a door that never opens. And so, over the years, fewer hands reached toward him. The villagers were not unkind. They simply learned that their offerings would always be returned. So they stopped offering. He became the one person in the village to whom nothing was given. He lived alone in a small wooden house at the edge of a long field. He was respectful, gentle, quiet. He kept to himself. Then one autumn, the man left the village. He was old, and he had decided to go and live near his sister in another town, where he could be closer to family for the years he had left. On the day he left, he asked two neighbors to help him clear the small wooden house. Before he closed the door for the last time, he placed a small wooden box on the table and told them it was for the village. After he had gone, they opened it together. It was full of unopened gifts. A folded handkerchief embroidered with someone's careful initials. A small unread book. A pen. A jar of jam, still sealed. A child's drawing. A pressed flower in folded paper. Dozens of small things, all clearly meant to be given to someone, all clearly bought or made by him, all clearly never delivered. He had not refused the gifts of the village. He had refused the door they came through. And because the door only opened in one direction in his life, nothing could pass either way. The hand that cannot receive, in time, forgets how to give. I have given my refusing many small names. The first name was humility. I had been taught that not accepting things was polite, that the well-mannered person makes themselves small in the moment of being offered something. I told myself I was being respectful, when really I was making a small wall. The second name was independence. I told myself a strong person does not need to be helped, that resilience meant carrying things alone. I told myself I was being capable, when really I was making sure no one saw me being capable of less. The third name was reciprocity. I told myself that to accept was to owe, and I did not want the small running tally of debt that begins when someone gives you something. I told myself I was being fair, when really I was refusing to be the one who would owe. The fourth name was worthiness. I told myself the very small, very quiet question, am I really the kind of person this is meant for? I told myself I was being humble, when really I was rejecting myself in advance, so the other person did not have to. And the refusing kept its shape through all four names. Maybe none of the names were the real one. Maybe what I was refusing was not the gift, and not the kindness, and not the cup, and not the seat, and not the bread. Maybe what I was refusing was the small change in who I was for a moment, when someone's care arrived at my door and asked to come in. A quiet answer came. Not from above. Not from outside. From the part of me that doesn't usually speak first. Maybe receiving asks something that giving does not. Giving lets me keep being the helper. The one who carries. The one who has enough to share. The one who is, for that moment, on the strong side of the exchange. Giving does not change my position. It keeps me where I already am, with a small kind addition. Receiving asks me to be the helped. The one who is carried. The one who, for this moment, does not have enough on my own. The one who is, for that moment, on the soft side of the exchange. Receiving changes my position. It moves me, even slightly, from the side I have arranged my life to stand on. That is the asymmetry I had not seen. A second quiet answer arrived, smaller, almost beside the first. Receiving is not the opposite of giving. Receiving is the harder half of the same gesture. I sat with that one for a long time. The kindness was not the difficult part. The kindness was easy. The hand reaching toward me, the cup being offered, the seat being pulled out, those were small and warm. What was difficult was being seen, for a moment, as the person who needed them. Not because needing was shameful. But because I had not practiced being that person without immediately apologizing for it. Maybe the kindness was not what I refused. Maybe I refused the small change in who I was for a moment. I once heard another small story. There was a gardener in a small town whose garden was the most loved place for many miles. People came from other villages to walk between her flower beds and her trees. Children sat beneath her wisteria. Old people rested on the small benches she had carved herself. The garden was, in every season, alive. She did all of it alone. She moved the soil. She trimmed the branches. She lifted the heavy clay pots into the sun and back into the shade. She covered the tender plants before the frost. She watered before the dawn and after the dusk. She did not have help, and she did not ask for it. The villagers loved the garden, and so they often asked her, "May I help you with that?" And she always answered, with a quiet smile, the same thing. "Thank you. I can manage." Please enjoy the garden. For many years it was true. Her hands were strong. Her back was straight. The work was hers, and she carried it. Then, one spring, she stood in front of a heavy stone she had moved 100 times before, and her body quietly told her it could no longer carry the garden alone. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no fall, no injury, no cry. Her body simply, gently, set down what it could no longer lift. She stood beside the stone for a long time. Then she walked to the gate of the garden, where a neighbor was passing by, and she said, for the first time in her adult life, "I think I need a little help today." The next morning, people began to arrive. Not many. Just a few neighbors at first. Then more. They brought tools and small lunches and a kind of quiet competence that comes from people who have wanted to help for a long time and finally been allowed to. The gardener sat on her small carved bench and watched her garden be carried by hands that were not hers. And as she watched, she understood something she had not understood in all the years of refusing. It was not that she had not wanted to burden them. It was that asking would have meant admitting she was not, after all, the entirely self-sufficient person she had needed to be. She had not refused their help. She had refused the version of herself who would have needed it. That spring, she learned to ask. And the garden, that year, was the most beautiful it had ever been. Because more than one pair of hands had finally been allowed to love it, and then something turned. I had been carrying the question as if it were about kindness. As if I were refusing something that came from the other person. As if my hand going up, the small no, the polite deflection, were about them. But sitting with the cup someone had made for me and never been allowed to give me, I realized something simpler. The kindness was not what I refused. Maybe I was not refusing their gift. Maybe I was refusing to be the person who could need it. Because to accept is to allow the other person to see, for a moment, that I am not entirely self-sufficient. That I have not arranged my life so perfectly that nothing is missing. That the small thing they brought is, in fact, filling a small gap I had been quietly walking around. And to allow that being seen is to allow myself to be, for a moment, the kind of person who can be helped. Which is, somehow, the harder costume to wear. A third quiet answer came, with the calm of something already known and only now noticed. The gift was not only for me. It was for the version of me that knew how to be held. Some kindness does not arrive at the door of who we are. It arrives at the door of who we have been afraid to admit we sometimes are. The gardener had not refused her neighbors. She had refused the version of herself who would need them. The old man had not refused the village. He had refused the door that could open in both directions. Maybe I had been doing the same thing, in much smaller ways, every day. And the door I had been keeping shut was not the door to my home. It was a door inside me. Then one last quiet answer came. The next time someone reached toward me with something small, I did not move my hand to stop them. I let it happen. I let the cup be set down in front of me. I let the seat be offered. I let the favor be done. I let the small piece of bread arrive on my plate. I let the coat be held open for me. It was strange. There was a small moment of exposure, a small flinch in my chest, a small old voice that started to say I'm okay. I let that voice speak quietly to itself, and I did not let it be the one that answered. The other person's hand did not come back empty. And on their face, for a brief second, something small and warm happened, a little brightness, a little quiet rightness, and I realized that the receiving had not only been for me. It had been for them too. I had been so worried about not being a burden that I had forgotten the other half of the equation. When I refused their offering, I had not been protecting them from inconvenience. I had been standing in the way of their small wish to give. I had been keeping their hand halfway out, forever, in the air between us. Maybe receiving was never weakness. Maybe it was the quiet way I let someone else's love finish its journey. I once heard someone say it more simply, in a voice that sounded like an old friend tired of seeing this happen. The door swings both ways. Love comes through, in both directions. And both halves of that movement, the giving and the receiving, are needed for the door to be a door at all. I am still learning. My hand still sometimes moves up before I notice. The old voice still sometimes speaks first. But more and more, I let the cup arrive. I let the seat be pulled out. I let the small kindness land. I let the person on the other side feel the small joy of their gift being received. And I am beginning to think, slowly, that this too is a kind of giving. The harder half. But still a giving. A quiet answer, cross-reference. Some kindnesses are easier to give than to receive. The cup is offered. The hand comes halfway out. And ours, before we have decided anything, is already moving in the opposite direction. It is not the gift that is being refused. It is the small change in who we are for a moment, when someone's care arrives at our door and asks to come in. The door we keep shut is not the door to our home. It is a door inside us. Receiving is not the opposite of giving. It is the harder half of the same gesture. And when we finally let the cup arrive, the other person's hand does not come back empty. The door swings both ways. Love comes through, in both directions. End of file.